Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Today, I am super excited to bring to you Dr. Michael Schmitz. Dr. Schmitz is a DO. He's an emergency physician in the state of Maine, and I recently came across his work from one of his essays, and I'm really excited to share his perspective with you and some of his writings with you today. So, Dr. Schmitz, Michael, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for reaching out. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to our chat.
That's great. Thank you for taking the time. Like I said, I recently came across one of your articles, and I was so struck by one of the concepts that you proposed that those of you who are in healthcare, those of you who are in hospital care, who are truly on the front lines and have been for the last couple of years, we keep saying burnout, but I love the title of your argument of your paper. Can we please stop calling it burnout? What do you propose instead for those like yourself who have been so hard hit by the last couple of years?
You know, I'm not exactly sure, and I realize that that's not the most satisfying answer. But I think there are a couple of guidelines that I think that both healthcare providers and people who are managing healthcare providers maybe should think about before they use that word. So when I hear someone say burnout, and it's not my decision to use that word or to describe my experience, what I feel like at that moment is, or I'm reminded of, one of my kids who needs to take a nap, and they're tired, they're stressed, they ate, they had the worst day possible. So the worst thing to tell them, even though I know they need to take a nap, is you're overtired, you need to take a nap, right? Never going to work. You get immediate resistance, and it just sort of doesn't fly. The thing that I think about more in terms of sort of medicine and how we diagnose something is that when someone presents with a symptom that's very nebulous, for instance, dizziness, the typical follow-up question is, well, describe what your experience of dizziness is like for you. And I think that's where some of the impetus for describing me hearing the word burnout and then feeling a little bit put off by some of the depersonalization, seeing that word sort of at the top of a blasted email, and it kind of got me thinking like, well, what I don't, that's not how I would describe what I'm experiencing. And it took me a while, actually a couple months, to figure out exactly what I was feeling. And it was when I heard the song, Messing with the Settings by Craig Finn, and that line about, I feel like I'm riding a train I'm not on. I was like, that's it. And it took months. I mean, I was like, I wrote that down, sat with it for a while, couldn't finish it. And then I heard those words and I was like, that is my experience. It's not burnout. It's, I feel like I'm riding a train I'm not on. I think
Beautiful piece of music. If people have not heard this
yeah.
song, please go look up Craig Finn's "Messing with the Settings." It's an incredible song, and I had never heard the song before reading your article
Mm-hmm.
and how that struck you. And wow, there are times when art just sums up what we're feeling, even though we didn't even 100% know what we were feeling. But another artist has captured that in words, and
Yeah.
it's hard to say how I understand because I don't live in your shoes, but I can understand that the amount of just fatigue and hopelessness that's gone on for the last couple of years, especially people like yourself who are in emergency medicine and in the EDs. That's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is all unexpected. It's part of preparation or dealing with COVID and dealing with everything that's come with it is, sort of a certain mindset. And it's coincidentally, it happens to be a mindset that's mentioned in the song. What I'm struck by is that someone who I never met, who, obviously is struggling with issues that don't have to deal with, but I often help people with, specifically drug addiction. Someone is acknowledging that that person is just playing the cards that they've been dealt the best that they possibly can. So that reminder um, also has been really helpful through this. That yeah, this is really challenging. I don't like the cards that are in front of me necessarily, but I'm going to play them the best way that I can. And then I'm going to think about things that give me some mental fortitude to sort of to move forward. One of those things is, reminding yourself that, you could look at this as saying this is the worst thing that ever could have possibly happened, or you could look at this and say everything that I've experienced up to this point has prepared me for this moment, and now I get to decide how I respond. Um, and it's not
Easy to
particularly
say,
easy,
harder to
but
do, right?
yeah, yeah, it is. It is a daily practice, sometimes an hourly practice, sometimes a minute to minute practice. But um, that's been a helpful perspective.
So could we go back to, like, I guess some of your early years? Did you always want to be a doc? Did you have other aspirational goals when you were growing up?
Oh, originally, when I went to college, I thought that I wanted to be a pre-med student and join the crew team. So I figured that that would be pretty awesome and be pretty cool and pretty preppy thing to do. So I wake up for the first practice, and for whatever reason, even though I set my alarm, I'm late. So I run down out of the dorm and stuff. I got everything on, and they're like, "Well, we're running the brain today, which is the loop around the campus. You better catch up." So fortunately, I did some cross country in high school, and I start running, and I catch up with them at the end, just in time for the person leading the practice to say, "You're just in time for the Indian sprints." And as we're doing the Indian sprints back and across the field, I start dry heaving, and I tell myself, I think I'm going to give that student ambulance thing a try. And that led to a career in EMS, being exposed to pre-hospital emergency medicine, volunteering with an off-campus ambulance corps, which was productive and helpful in a lot of different ways. But really giving some hands-on experience with the pre-med curriculum to sort of be a reminder, this is what I want to do. And um, I was really impressed by the preceptors and the people that I got to work with, but I was most impressed by the physicians that I interacted with, and a couple of them happened to be DOs, and what's that kind of thing, and it just sort of fed the fire, so to speak.
I grew up in the shadow of Kirksville, Missouri.
Okay.
I
Oh
guess
yeah. Okay.
kind of the birthplace of osteopathic medicine,
Yeah.
and so I grew up going to DOs all the time, and all over rural America, right? Especially in the part of the country that I was in. So I was very comfortable with that idea. I've always loved DOs, and I know that for many of the much of the work that I do with EMS and trauma folks and emergency folks, I always find it so heartening. I'm not sure if that's the right word or not, but when somebody is a doc and has also been an EMT out in the field, helping save those lives out in the field, and then carried that over into saving the lives inside the ED. I think that garners you a lot of props and respect with EMS.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an experience that I try to keep in mind because I realize that now I'm that person who, when an EMS provider is arriving with a patient, I'm the person who's, either giving feedback or has this opportunity to be positive, to be constructive, and that it's important to be really careful and supportive with my words, and how to sort of get to the next step. Because ultimately, as much as we talk about healthcare shortages and that kind of stuff, we need to look at that person as a healthcare provider who maybe is going to be a paramedic, for the next 10 or 15 years, and we're going to see that person again and work again, and they're going to have a question, and need to talk to someone over the phone and want to know that they're listening and supportive, or they're going to take a path where they decide I want to be a respiratory therapist or a nurse, or God forbid, just kidding, go to med school.
Right.
Either way, and I've met all of them, and it's one of the proudest moments. Since you brought up DOs, one of the proudest moments in my career was someone who I met on the first, I think my first month as an attending. He came in, he's a paramedic, and he goes, I got into medical school, and my friends are telling me I shouldn't do it. And the, the emergency department was chaos because it was summer and blah, blah, blah. But I sat him down. I said, I don't know you. I don't know, you don't know me, but who are these friends of yours who are telling you that you can't do this? Like, here's my number, here's my email. And we ended up staying in touch and working together. And 4 years later, he asked me to hood him at his when he got his DO degree, and that was really cool.
Did he happen to follow your footsteps into emergency medicine?
Yes, he
Okay.
chose. He considered a lot of things. He served in the Army first, and then residency, and he's in New Hampshire right now, and he's pretty awesome.
That's
So I'm really
fantastic.
really happy for him. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
fantastic.
that's pretty cool to, be able to do that,
Yeah, yeah.
or see someone
So,
grow in
so
that way, I should say.
I love what you brought up there. You're basically talking about mentoring, right? And I love to the positions that I have to be able to also mentor people, and specifically I think about doing this with my pre-meds at Notre Dame. And
Hmm.
the first assignment that they receive during the semester is to just write a real quick 2-page reflection on a time that they have been there for someone else, or a time that someone has been there for them. So like it's
Hmm.
uh, trying to break down that idea of compassion. Is there a certain story that comes to mind for you whenever I give you that prompt?
Yeah, definitely. Um, So, getting back to the EMS realm, we mentioned before that I got started in college and worked my way through the certifications and et cetera. And I got to a point where I was the ALS provider on an ambulance, and on a Friday afternoon in October, just about 25 years ago, and we got called for call in another town for a 7-year-old who gets hit by a car, and it was a first for me in a lot of ways. It's it not to go into all the details because the things that I remember about that are very quick. I remember the kid lying in a ditch, opening the door. I remember the dent in the hood of the car that this child's head made, and then stuff in the ambulance. But the thing that sticks out the most for me out of that experience is that in the ambulance we're in, there's a sort of walkway between the front where the driver sits and where a passenger can sit, and the crew chief chair in the back, which is at the head of the patient. And the mom gets in the front seat, and we start driving and we're doing things, and she says, I need to know one thing. And I look through and she says, is my son going to die? And I just felt completely, through no one's fault, or through my own lack of internal preparation, I had not thought about that situation, or how I would handle it. Um, And afterwards, once we got to the hospital, Obviously, there was a lot of debriefing and things that needed to happen because it was a pretty, I mean, this kid was severely injured. Um, and I really wasn't, I hadn't prepared myself for that type of situation. Um, and finally, I reached out and ended up getting, talking to someone one on one, which ended up being really helpful because it helped unwind some of the sort of rescue 911 type of perceptions that were in my head and that I had put in my head about what would happen or what could happen in those types of situations. And what I remember the most about getting help were that, the person who helped me, his name is Bill. When we sat down to talk about it together, he did a couple things that were, he didn't say anything, but they were done with very, very clear intention. Granted, this is 1999, so not everyone has, a little iPhone type thing, but he sat down, there was just one light on. He disconnected the phone in his office. He took his pager, he turned it off. He took his watch, he took it off. He turned them both upside down. And he basically said, "We're here for as long as you need," um, which was pretty cool. The thing that he helped me get out of my head was this idea that in order for me to be okay, that the boy who was hit by a car, that he had to be okay, that they were linked, which is a pretty naive idea to have. And kind of immature, but it was something that had to be addressed. And speaking of music, so I leave that appointment, and I decide I'm gonna stop at a gas station and get a Snapple, because he had said don't drink, don't consume alcohol, be good to yourself, do all this stuff. Um, and I'm about to pay, and the song "Tears in Heaven" comes on by Eric Clapton, and I just about lose it when I get back to my car. If you're not familiar, Eric Clapton wrote that song about his own son, who was about the same age, dying from an accident, specifically, I think, falling out of a window, which is just
Window,
a
yeah.
tragedy. Um, but because of that, and because of the preparation and hearing that, and again, the music, I was just able to, it was like the final step to help me let go. Um, the
Catharsis is the word that is
absolutely,
coming to mind.
absolutely, absolutely, and just have the cry that I needed to have, that I've been putting off for 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 days. Too long, too long. But the benefit of getting help, which I think sort of played out in its own way, which was really really special, is that one of the pieces of advice that Bill gave me was he said, be good to yourself. So, I had in college, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, I was not a fantastic student. And I realized that you speak with pre med students. Please don't ever cut class, attend every class you can possibly attend, do your pre reading, all that kind of stuff. Do not do what Mike did in college. Not a good idea. Anyway, but I decide that psychology class today is not the right thing for me, and I'm going to go get a haircut. So I drive over to this shop, and I sit down and grab the Rolling Stone magazine, and I'm waiting my turn. And what I don't hear when I sit down is someone say, "Oh my God," and it's the boy's mom. And because I got help in that moment, she came over and we talked, and because I got help, I was prepared, at least at that point, to be supportive of her, to share thoughts and be caring of her, to express my condolences, to express that I was thinking about her and her family. She had an opportunity to say that I know that you did everything that you could. Um, and if I hadn't gotten help and that specific moment had happened, I and I wasn't prepared, I would have made her situation that much worse. Never mind my own. But more importantly, I would have made it worse for her, because I wasn't, I couldn't help that I was. It's no one's fault that I wasn't prepared the first time when she asked that question. But what happened after that, to think about Stoic principles and all that kind of stuff, that was up to me. And because I got help, I was able to be prepared. Um, and
When you're
that's
telling
something
your
that
story,
yeah,
I don't mean to cut you off, but whenever I'm hearing
no,
this story, it sounds like
yeah,
you were simply unequipped, right? You're trained how to go out and save a life on the ambulance crew, but
hmm
communication wise and how to deal with these family members in traumatic situations, simply
yeah,
unequipped, right? Don't have
yeah,
that compassionate vocabulary yet. But
right,
you actually were really intentional about developing that and practicing learning from that experience.
yeah,
That's you're teachable, right? You're teachable, which is one of the
right,
greatest traits I think anybody can have is being teachable.
yeah. So we, oh, sorry, after
No,
you.
go ahead, please.
So along those lines, the way that I try to pay that forward is, one of my other hats is the paramedic program medical director, and 10 years or so ago, um, they sort of refined some of the educational guidelines and better define them. And they said, okay, we need you to certify that your students can demonstrate that they have cognitive abilities and that they understand the material, that they have psychomotor abilities and that they know how to do the stuff. But then you also have to demonstrate and prove that they have sufficient affective skills to be good providers. So the program director calls me up and he says, "Hey, you're the medical director. How do they teach this in medical school?" And my first answer was, "Well, they don't."
They don't, right?
So that was a little bit of a problem. And fortunately, around the same time, there was a pretty cool article or perspective in the New England Journal of Medicine about a program that they do at Harvard called Into the Water, where they introduce reflective writing to medical students who are between the second and third year of school. So, in the sort of more traditional format, that's when they go from academic learning to on hand learning. And what they found was that their students were not really equipped to deal with what they were observing. So, as a way of sort of introducing that, we decided to do something similar on the first day of paramedic school to introduce the affective skills. But here's the interesting thing: when I asked them to write about their experience, these are, I mean, some of them are older, but on average, these are people who are out of high school with 1 or 2 years of community college, high school. And when I asked them about if they've had similar experiences to mine or what's described in the article about, resuscitations and children dying and all these horrible things, they're 20 years old and this has already happened to them. They're telling me things about, well, because I volunteer in my town, I went to a cardiac arrest in the high school in the gymnasium of the high school where I attended. I showed up at a car accident and I knew the person. Um, Sometimes they tell me I really don't believe this or what you're talking about in your FOS, but I don't really care. But it's shocking that it's already happening to them. So
And they're sharing these stories, right? I mean, this is the essence of what
yeah,
narrative medicine is. We learn and we grow and we evolve and we adapt from sharing our stories and from listening to the stories of others. So
absolutely.
how does it work for you personally then? I mean, you're teaching EMS students this.
Yeah.
How does that manifest in your own life? How do you take care of yourself through these measures?
I don't do a good job of taking care of myself, honestly. Hey, look, I teach this stuff. I don't know how to do it. No, just kidding. Um, I kind of, it really wasn't until I went through it would be nice to tell you that after that session with Bill that I went on to being an enlightened person. that everything from that point on was easy, but that was not the case. It was more like, oh, this is cool. Uh, that whole experience kind of sucked, but I learned something from it. And what happened makes me feel supported and have a different perspective on, what I'm aware of and how things happen in the universe. And it was pretty cool that one person meets another. So I'm going to go back to doing what I've been doing now. But yeah, that was fun. Um, and I can't honestly tell you that I really invested a sufficient or an appropriate amount of time in this, in med school or in residency, because part of it was just feeling like there's no time. And again, that's not a criticism. It's just sort of the process. Um, it wasn't until sort of I got thinking more about once I was an attending and out practicing on my own and getting the cognitive and proving that the cognitive and psychomotor skills are there, that sort of started thinking about, okay, well, how did that patient experience go, and what could I do better? That this went, walking out of a room and saying, okay, that went okay, that didn't go okay. I read the room. How did I tune into the room? What could I have done better? And kind of working on that. The other thing that I think that healthcare providers need to think about is that, there's this huge focus on continuing medical education credits or CME credits. But really what you're talking about, and the resilience and the things that and the affective skills that need to be maintained, is really more of a continuous maintenance of empathy, or that type of CME credit. And the way that I've only recently started doing that is a lot of outside reading, not about medicine, but about Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and all these people, historical figures who were flawed, very much like myself, but who had significant challenges and how they met them or overcame them. Um, and I kind of got a wake up call again from a friend who made time to sit down and talk to me when I was going through some stuff that was not at all work related. And, we're having a couple beers, and you get to that point in the night where your friend tells you, do you know what your problem is? And, as many times as we've all heard that, I'm like, no, I really want you to tell me what my problem is. He goes, your problem is that you're like one of those crazy jarheads who's trying to take back the island by themselves. And let me tell you something. He goes, the people who try to do that, they don't come back. And if they come back, they don't come back whole. And his point was that basically white knuckling all this stress and all this kind of stuff, and not really having an outlet for it. So I kind of started writing some of that down, and, it's not, I don't know, it just got it out of my head. So that was helpful. And then when COVID happened, suddenly there's this challenge where there's so much uncertainty. There's so many unknowns. There's so many questions of what do we do and how do we respond. And ended up being sort of helpful in saying, well, there are these principles, and they can help sort this out. Like, how do we think about how our behavior will impact other people, and are we all going to be in this together, or look out for ourselves, or what's going to happen? So again, it ended up, not trying to say lemons into lemonade, but you just play the hand you're dealt, right, and go forward. So
And we're
keep
going
moving
from
forward.
almost I don't want to say singularity, but almost like a solo mindset to a community or communal mindset, right?
Absolutely,
It's
absolutely,
we need one another as human beings I
absolutely.
think we all need a friend like yours too that'll say, the tough stuff, right? I want to
Yeah.
hear that. I'm not sure everybody wants to
Yeah.
hear, hey, you know what your problem
Yeah.
is? I personally do. I want
Yeah.
to grow. I
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
evolve from my
Yeah.
problems. But
Well,
yeah,
it
whenever we
took a
can work,
couple it took a
go
couple
ahead.
beers to get to that point, but yeah.
That's always a nice social lubricant there. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I got some questions for you, and I like
Sure.
to shoot some of these questions past people, and I've kind of
Sure.
been changing them up because in healthcare, whenever you ask people these questions about like, hey, what would you do for yourself?
Hmm.
People a lot of times in healthcare don't want to say what they'll do for themselves. They want to say, "Well, I'll be altruistic and I'll use my time and my resources to help other people." And so I've been asking that question. If you had $100 that you would spend on yourself, what would you do it on? And you actually have a well thought out answer to this question, right?
I listened to a couple of your podcasts beforehand, and I was like, "Oh man, I hope he asked me that." And, I'd take that $100 and go to the record store, spend a couple hours going through the used records to find, rescue a couple darlings, final, and get them out of the store and home in the safety of my home office, and well, they'll be well taken care of. Um,
Nice.
and just enjoy the search of that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What? And you said you've got a pretty nice collection, right?
I'm working on it. I'm working
Yeah.
on it. Yeah.
What's some of your bragging rights?
My uh, I don't know how, but I found this old Nat King Cole record that play. I forget who he's playing with, but it's worth a fair amount of money. It was like $10. But my favorite find is the Bruce Springsteen 1975 to 1985 live box set on vinyl. When I was little, I always remember going to the record store and maybe having some money and that kind of stuff from a holiday or something. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I invested those funds elsewhere in bands whose names I can't remember. But that box set was always up on the shelf. And first it was in vinyl, then it was in CDs and or cassettes, and then CDs. And I always passed on it, and it was the biggest mistake because that LP set, I mean, that has everything in it. Every emotion you could feel is in those pages, and so I was able to find that in a good sort of copy of it, and I'm really happy to have that, and it's something that I cherish.
When we whenever I get to talk to somebody who's deep into music as I am, I
Hmm.
share that Springsteen and Dylan are two of the people that are responsible for me being alive.
Oh wow.
When I was hospitalized, yeah, I've always been a huge music fan. But whenever I
Sure.
was hospitalized, a very close friend of mine made me a mixtape back in those days, and
Yeah.
it had Dylan's song "Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues."
Hmm.
And it was a song that I had known for a few years because I had Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume 2. But, it's that experience where you're familiar with something and then an event happens and you go back and view that thing you're familiar with in a totally different light. And the,
Yeah.
the second line of that song says, negativity don't pull you through. And that became my mantra, really, while I was hospitalized. I can't focus on all the negative things that have happened. I've got to look at the positive things that I still have.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's one of the lyrics that I base my entire personal mission, vision, and values off of. And then I
Wow.
think of with Springsteen, gosh, there's so many. But the one that I particularly think about is from his, I believe it came out in 95, maybe early, yeah, 95, The Ghost of Tom Joad album.
Mm.
And he's got a line in one of the songs that says, you get used to anything, and sooner or later it just becomes your life. And
Yeah.
that struck me that at some point, this new to blindness, new to trauma, new to this whole new way of living, it's just at some point it's just life, right? It's not
Yeah.
the newness and the shock and all that will wear off, and you still got
Yeah.
your life, right? And you'll get
Yeah.
used to it. You'll get used to
Yeah.
it.
Wow. Oh,
So
wow.
one of my
Thank
other
you
questions
for
then that I'm
sharing that.
asking folks these days is, so let's
Yeah.
say you're 16 years old, you're hanging out with your
Yep.
buds, or
Yep.
you're hanging out after school, driving to school, driving around, cruising back before gas was so expensive that nobody could afford
Yeah.
it. What's on the radio? What's on the radio when you're 16
What's
years
on the
old? What are you
radio?
listening
Oh,
to?
wow. Not proud, but there's definitely some Guns N' Roses, some
Mm-hmm.
Blind Melon,
Mm-hmm.
who a tremendously underrated band, by the way.
Absolutely.
And if you're looking for a song that gets me going or inspires me, it would be "Change" by Blind Melon.
Mm-hmm.
On
Mm-hmm.
that line, I want to write my words on the face of today. Like, oh man, that guy, wow,
Yeah.
wow,
Gone too
absolutely.
early.
But that's
Gone too early too.
yeah, exactly. But that's who's on there. A lot of hair metal, probably.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's who's on the grunge, Nirvana. That's what's on
Yeah.
there. How about for you? What were you? What was on your radio at
16
that
years
time?
old,
Yeah.
it was really just at the time that grunge was starting to take off. So most of my listening when I was 16 was concentrated on classic rock. So it was Zeppelin and the Dead and the Doors, and
Sure.
I didn't really truly appreciate Springsteen until I was in my 20s, and
Yeah.
I was listening to Dylan in high school, but Hendrix, that anything that would have been playing at Woodstock in '69.
Sure.
So
Cool.
another question for you, then, kind of random, off topic, is what are you reading right now for
What am I
fun?
reading right now? I am reading the book "Examine Lives" by James Miller. It's sort of a overview of philosophy. Um, and basically goes into the historical life and some of the basic tenets of several major philosophers or big thinkers. Socrates, Plato, Hobbes is in there, I believe, but I didn't get to that part yet. And then Nietzsche, I believe they put at the end to kind of cap it all off. But that's what's on the bedside table right now.
That's one I probably ought to delve into. When you're talking about Stoic philosophers, I've read Meditations and Letters from
Hmm.
Seneca, and I've
Yeah,
also gained a lot of great insight from the Stoics. I think there's a quote, and I don't know who said it, but it's something like, average minds wrestle with questions that great minds answered thousands of years ago.
that's
and
fair.
and I
That's
don't
fair.
know if that's necessarily true, but I think it does
Yeah,
remind us to return back to the greatest thinkers of the day. And yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as you point out, I mean, Marcus Aurelius, of course, his empire had to deal with the plague. I mean, with no vaccine, no germ theory, no science, he had to deal with that as a challenge, among a lot of other things, including his own health issues. He was chronically ill and had some infections and lost a bunch of children. Um, so it's there's something sort of relieving about realizing or thinking that this person um, had all these issues to deal with, but they're sitting and all these flaws, but they're sitting at night writing down these thoughts that they're having that they don't intend anyone else to read. I mean, obviously the internet, no concept that you and I would be talking over a computer about what they were scribbling, or even that it would survive, and yet it's here and inspires so many people and has a operating system for accepting change and dealing with challenges. So
something we can all learn from, right? Something we can all
absolutely.
learn from. And so I guess my last question, I feel like you and I could sit down and talk for hours and split a six pack and really
Yeah,
rap about many of
yeah.
our mutual interests.
I don't
But
drink
I want to
anymore,
get, I want
but yeah,
to, what's that again?
I don't drink anymore.
Oh, you're a smart man. You're a
Yeah,
smart man.
yeah.
Uh, and
COVID for
also, you
some
don't
reason.
use social media anymore, right?
On LinkedIn, but I dropped. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
with COVID, it just I couldn't. Yeah,
Probably better off for it. Probably better off for it.
yeah.
So with your position and your history and experience and all of the things that make you who you are, if you had the ability to broadcast your personal message to all of humanity, that idea of the biggest billboard on the world's tallest mountain, what do you want humanity to know or do?
I think ooh, and I can't quote someone else, right? You want my idea?
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, oh man. Um, you know what? We're going to stick with what works, all right? And we haven't talked about Star Wars yet, which is a big miss. And this comes out of my mouth basically 24/7. It's basically like I mean, almost like a religion. So I'm going to quote Master Yoda. Just put, do or do not. There is no try.
There's no try. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would. There's a little face on the billboard. And the X-wing fighter being levitated up, and Luke Skywalker looking all frustrated. That's what I
You've
would
got
put.
this down. You've got this
I
down. You
got
got
it
the
down.
artistic
Yeah. Well,
design already.
you want people to pay attention to it, right? So
That's right. That's right. Well, Michael, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining
likewise,
me. Thank you for
likewise.
doing what you've done over the last several years, especially of making sure that those of us in the public are treated when we need treated. Um, this has been a harrowing time, and I'm awfully grateful for people like you. So thank you for spending some time with me and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much for those kind words, and also I appreciate your work and what you're doing to share your experience to help educate and help make healthcare providers into people who are present, to use your word, continually. So I
Yeah.
think that's really cool.
Thank you. Thank
I'd
you.
like to, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
I'd like one of the things I do on my way to work is I have a little playlist. I'd like to send that to you.
Yeah, please.
I was hoping maybe you do a playlist of things that helped you get through, because I'd like to hear more about that, or I'd like to hear the songs that helped you
Yeah.
become who you are right now. That would be pretty cool. If you have the time, that'd be cool.
Absolutely, and I tell you what, I'll get your mailing address. I'll send you a couple of copies of my books because I straight ripped off the notion that Stephen King did with many of his novels about putting
Yeah,
a song lyric at the beginning of
yeah,
each chapter that kind of sums up what that chapter is going to be, and it's usually a
yeah,
line from Neil Young or somebody like that,
yeah.
you'll read many of those in there about what a big influence music has had on my healing, and obviously for you
Cool.
too.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for spending some time with me. And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in to Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. We appreciate everyone sharing and subscribing and liking and commenting and doing all those social media interaction-y things. So thank you all so much again for being with me on this episode of Compassion and Courage. And we look forward to seeing you next time.